like the NSA and the CIA. They were never going to be used here domestically in America, yet they have been doing that for over 40 years. They've been operating illegally outside of their charter, outside the Constitution, violating the Constitution continually in the United States, and we still have presidential candidates who pretend that's not going on. So they offer us something like this. We have yet another DARPA challenge that's coming up with robots, and this is being put out on Popular Science, the people that always have just a gee whiz attitude, no matter how sinister the technology. Meet Chimp, a disaster response robot with 4-limb drive. If you believe that this robot here, or that any of these robots, are really about helping people simply in an emergency situation, of course, they could be used to help in a situation like Fukushima Daiichi. They could be used instead of humans to go in and manipulate things. That's the justification they're using for it. But if you think that's the key mission of DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects, if you think that's what they're about, then you're nothing but a chump when it comes to things like this robot. So they're going to have yet another one of these contests. They had one just last year. And of course, Google bought all of the most promising robots from that competition, trying to get a monopoly, and it looks like they're pretty much, they're getting very close to having a monopoly of the most promising technology at this point in time. Stay with us when we come back. We're going to talk about something that sounds like it's straight out of the Planet of the Apes. It's not just about treating them as humans, it's also about releasing a pandemic. What's going on when the CDC and the Pentagon weaponizes bacteria and then time after time releases it, accidentally of course, into the environment? Stay with us, we'll be right back. Now, the Center for Disease Control as well as the Department of Defense are telling us that they are working on ways to protect us from bioterrorism. In order to do that, they work with very dangerous diseases and they weaponize them. What does it mean when they weaponize these things? They refer to it as gain of function. What they do is they make these things easier to transmit and harder to kill. How does that protect us? Very good question, especially when we look at the carelessness and the sloppy work that's been happening, especially within just the last year, the many, many outbreaks. And we're going to go over those in just a moment. But now we've had, just yesterday, a live anthrax incident. It was accidentally shipped throughout the United States and to South Korea. 4 lab workers in the United States and up to 22 overseas have been put in post-exposure treatment after the U.S. military inadvertently shipped live anthrax samples via Federal Express. You know, when you absolutely positively have to get the pandemic there the next day. They say they thought these shipments were dead and they were shipped under less rigorous conditions, obviously. Leanne McAdoo has more information about that.
The Pentagon admits it accidentally sent a shipment of live anthrax to as many as 9 laboratories in the U.S. as well as a lab overseas. A CDC investigation of this mistake is underway, and at the time there is no known risk to the general public. The anthrax samples were shipped from an Army facility in Utah to government and commercial labs in Texas, Maryland, Wisconsin, Delaware, New Jersey, Tennessee, New York, California, and Virginia. The labs were working as part of a Pentagon effort to develop a new diagnostic test to identify biological threats in the environment. Dead or inactivated agents were expected, but one lab reports being able to grow live Bacillus anthracis. The safety failure comes on the heels of increased scrutiny of bioterror agents and their oversight around the country. Last June, more than 80 people may have been exposed to live anthrax when a CDC lab sent it by a mistake.
Remember that it was just last July that we had the head of, they said, a troubled CDC anthrax lab resign. There was a leak at the time. They said embarrassing and serious safety incidents at the Centers for Disease Control. The people who are at the lead in all of this, they said it resulted in the resignation of a top lab official in Atlanta. This was part of the CDC's bioterrorism rapid response. I guess we need to ask who is the bioterrorist here? The person, Michael Farrell, was reassigned to other duties last month in the wake of his team's mishandling of live anthrax, same as just happened this week, and potential exposure of dozens of agency employees to a particularly deadly strain of the bacteria, although none has shown signs of infection. Now, this is what one of the 2 biosafety experts who was asked to testify at a House Oversight Committee hearing said. Sean Hoffman said, he's a scapegoat and everybody knows that. He said Mike had just as much to do with this incident as the people all of the way at the top. And I would say that in light of the continued problems that we've seen at the CDC and elsewhere, that has been proven to be true. This has continued in spite of the fact that he was fired. He was simply a scapegoat. In an article from USA Today the very next month, Allison Young pointed out that hundreds of bioterrorism labs mishaps are cloaked in secrecy. She said more than 1,100 laboratory incidents involving potential bioterror germs were reported to federal regulators during 2008 through 2012. That's not even up to date. That's not even including the anthrax incident in July, the month earlier, and the one that just happened, of course, this week. This was back in last August. She says details of what happened are cloaked in secrecy. Well, of course they are, because this is something that the Department of Defense and the CDC is doing to supposedly protect us from bioterrorism. See, we have to be concerned about that. So we take very deadly bacteria, in many cases, not even indigenous to the United States, bring them here into our labs. We make them harder to kill. We make them easier to transmit. We saw a pushback against this, not in the media so much as we saw in the Senate and the Congress. And we had a hearing last fall. They stopped funding new projects, they said, new gain of function projects. Nevertheless, that's not a moratorium. They are still funding the ones that they had already okayed. So that was the situation in the fall. Then we learned just a month or two after that there was a leak at the Primate Center. The Tulane National Primate Research Center near New Orleans became the focus of both federal and state investigations after tests in December showed 2 rhesus macaque monkeys were not part of any experiments. Nevertheless, were sickened by a strain of bioterror bacteria that was being studied in a biosafety level 3 lab elsewhere on the 500-acre campus. Now, this is what happened. This is a bacteria called Burkholderia pseudomallei. It's not indigenous to the United States. They were working with it, weaponizing this, and somehow it got out of their biosafety level 3 lab. It got into the monkeys that were just roaming free on this 500-acre facility. It's something that is very troubling because once this gets into the soil, it can take a very long time to appear, and it can spread and continue to infect animals everywhere. They were concerned about how this had happened, and they still have not found how this got out of the lab. There's still no explanations to it. They were concerned that there were workers that were exposed there, investigators that were exposed there. They had one FDA official that showed signs of having this bacteria. They said, well, she's investigated this before, so I'm sure that's where she got this exposure. They also said, don't be surprised if this does show up in the soil because, it's probably there. Nevertheless, the CDC pushed back and said, no, this has never been in the United States. If it shows up there, it's going to be because of their sloppy handling. This is what we need to be concerned about. In case after case, we see that the government that tells us that it's going to protect us is our greatest danger, creating threats that don't exist, whether it's Al-Qaeda and ISIS and things that are real threats to our life, just like this bacteria. They create these threats and then they go off to fight them. They cause us to have to pay for them in terms of money and in terms of our lives. We need to shut down these gain of function experiments. We need to stop doing this. They have shown that they cannot reliably and safely handle this, and they need to explain why we really need to have such an aggressive bioweapon program in the first place. Now, stay with us. Right after the break, we're going to be talking to Wolfgang Halbig. He's trying to get answers about something else, Sandy Hook. He worked for 19 months to try to get information. He was stonewalled. He was threatened. He finally got a FOIA hearing. So we're going to talk to him about that FOIA hearing he had a couple of weeks ago and one that's coming up this next week. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Now, if you remember, in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting, we immediately got a full court press for gun control. At the same time, there were many questions that many of us were asking, anomalies that we saw in what was being given to us as the official story. Wolfgang Halbig is someone who was a state trooper as well as a principal of a school. He combined those two experiences to become a school security consultant. He's not someone who has ever been involved in any other investigations like 9/11 or anything like that. He was someone who was a school security consultant looking at school shootings. He's investigated many school shootings. He's never had this kind of resistance, not only stonewalling, but outright intimidation. He's gotten very angry about this. He has been on this like a bulldog, and now after 19 months, at the end of April, he was able to finally get his first FOIA hearing. We're going to talk to him live after this interview, but Dan Bidandi went to the first FOIA hearing and talked to Wolfgang Halbig after that.
Dan Bidandi, INFOWARS.com. We're in Hartford, Connecticut with Wolfgang Halbig. How you doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for coming all the way up here and taking a look at what's happening today. It is, you know what, that is the classic work in Connecticut. It's unbelievable how they play with the law, they manipulate it, they play with it, and people laugh about it. These witnesses from Connecticut, they think it's funny. I don't think it's funny. That's a filthy, deplorable looking school. It's a toxic waste dump, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves.
I've seen them all with smiles, all wasting time purposely, so, you know, it gets you out of here quick.
Oh, absolutely. They're dragging it. They got the heat turned up in here. Everything they can do to make it uncomfortable. But you know what? I've got a good attorney. I love Kay Wilson. She's not afraid to ask questions, and we'll be back. And they're going to have to answer, especially the one about Connecticut State Trooper. Can you imagine? You got a state helicopter that doesn't have audio tapes or record. What kind of state troopers are these?
Yeah, I kind of found it hard to believe that the helicopter was not communicating with the officers on the ground. I mean, that was like, wow.
Well, you know what's really interesting? We actually have the flight log. Can you imagine the police chief says, oh, I don't know, I've never seen anything like that. That is the Connecticut State Police official flight log. And you know what it reads? To assist the Newtown Police Department in searching for suspects in the woods. Now, let me think how that works. How did a helicopter know they needed somebody? Somebody had to call them. And they lied like a dog. It's under oath.
Chief Kehoe, do you know whether or not there are any transcripts of communications for December 14, 2012 from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. between the Newtown Police Department and the Connecticut State Police Trooper 1 helicopter?
To the best of my knowledge, there are no communications.
No communications?
That's correct.
It's a game changer for America, and they ought to see it for what it is. They're playing silly games. They got attorneys who are hiding behind the truth, manipulating data. And this is the one, did y'all hear it today? The town. Well, you know what? They painted it with a broad brush. The town covers everybody. It covers the school board, covers the police department, and all they have to do is say, the town doesn't have it. And you're supposed to be happy about it. I'm looking for custodian of records. The town is not the custodian of records, even though he writes that in there.
Do you have any reason to believe that I was not responding on behalf of the Board of Education, the town of Newtown, and the Newtown Police Department?
I do not believe.
All right.
I want the answers from the school board. I want the answers from the police department. I don't give a damn about the town. But see, that's what they're doing. They're manipulating the law.
Are you aware of any emails that may have come from school principal Dawn Hochsprung or her assistant school principal for the period of May 1st, 2012 through December 13th, 2012 to the facilities department?
Yes.
And have you reviewed those emails?
I don't quite understand the question.
Have you looked at them? Have you read them?
Of course.
Okay, so they exist.
I'm not sure.
Well, Attorney Frank can't help you with that. If you received them and you read them, then they must
I would
exist.
think that they must exist, yes.
You testified that you did not receive a copy of the sign-on log referred to on a traffic sign posted outside the Newtown Sandy Hook Elementary School on December 14, 2012, right? And the town responded that it does not have that document, right? Isn't that what it says?
Yeah, but you have nothing. You don't have any documents. I mean,
Isn't that what it says? Answer my question. Isn't that what it says? The town does not have responsive documents.
absolutely. But you have documents from nobody.
And you just don't believe that, correct?
I don't believe you. I don't trust you.
We don't believe it, Wolfgang. We don't believe it.
The dash cam videos, I actually got the video. I got the video of Seabrook's dash cam. It actually has timestamp. They've refused to give it to me. They have it, and yet they refused, I think they tampered and altered the documents. That's a crime. Law enforcement can't do that.
And it's unbelievable. And again, they're wasting time, so they want to prolong this. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Again,